So people have a lot to say about neighbors. Robert Frost wrote this: good fences make good neighbors. Someone said, are you guys with me? I know you got an hour taken from you, but that's good stuff. Here we go. So Robert Frost wrote, good fences make good neighbors. Isn't that amazing? Okay. Someone said, welcome thy neighbor into thy fallout shelter. He'll come in handy if you run out of food. Okay? Now, G.K. Chesterton wrote this: your next door neighbor is not a man. He was an environment. He is the barking of a dog. He is the noise of a piano. He is a dispute about a party wall. He is drains that are worse than yours, or roses that are better than yours. And so I've moved quite a bit in my life, and I actually went through last night. I won't even tell you how many homes I've lived in my years, but it's pretty shocking. So I've had tons of neighbors. And my dad and I, in my teens, junior high and high school, it was just the two of us. And so we moved around quite a bit in this town, and it was interesting. People were most friendly to us when we moved out. And it was, so I started taking note of that, and I realized it's because, neighboring is tough. It's hard, and people felt more safe. They say, you guys are going so soon? I feel like you just came. And now they start asking questions and stuff, right? So neighbors are interesting. I've always been intrigued by them. Most of my earliest memories are with neighbors. Like when I was a toddler, I remember being at neighbors' homes and just having it be a warm, welcoming place, and just being loving and going through that. We built our home on some property in Central California, and our neighbors actually came at strategic points when we built the home to help us put the roof up and other points of the home. And so I remember that, wow, that's what neighbors are for. I've also had neighbors, like maybe some of you, where I've been glad that my doors lock at night, right? Where it's kind of they're pretty close, and so I need to make sure this locks up. I've had neighbors that their music is up so loud that it shakes the walls, barking dogs, race car driver neighbors, right? If you know those. I had one guy, and the kids weren't too little, but they were little enough it worried me. He had this car that had turbo, and so he really made sure that the turbo, he had this idea that with turbo, you had to gun it right when you started, and you had to gun it right when you stopped. So he would pull out of the street, the cul-de-sac, just, 50 miles an hour, in this, this little tiny cul-de-sac, and he'd pull in, he'd gun it, slam on his brakes, and go in. And so race car driver neighbors, right? I know that for the past 20 years, I was thinking, Michelle and I, some of our best memories are just surprises with neighbors, where we just, all of a sudden just life happens with our neighbors. And so good times with them. There's plenty of barriers to neighboring, though. Most of us struggle to build relationships with our neighbors because of these things. We don't see value in it, okay? So it's like you see somebody else do something, and you just look at it and you say, good for you, right? I have zero interest in that. For neighboring, that's, I think, one of the number one reasons that we don't neighbor is we just say, wait a minute, I'm doing my job, I'm raising my family, I have my friends, I have my church community, or my other organizations that I'm a part of. Why am I going to pour in there? That's when I sit back in my chair, or I work in my yard, and so why am I going to build that relationship with my neighbor? Another barrier is that we lack the time needed to build the relationship. So, it's right. We've got all the other things going on, and we look at it and we say, well, gosh, that's going to take so much time. Or they're going to talk my ear off, or I've got to do this. I've got to accomplish this thing. For me to take time and talk to them, it's not enough. Then we lack trust due to the proximity of them being way too near to us, right? So if you share too much, or they share too much, and they're that close, or you don't like them, or they don't like you, or any of those things, the trust is there. It's like, gosh, am I really going to trust this person that's that close, that they're almost like in my home? So these barriers here, they don't really keep us from not saying hi, right? We all do that. I've noticed that in the Midwest here, everybody, when you drive by, you wave, and I love it. I absolutely love that. And, won't keep us from talking about the weather with our neighbors, that sort of thing. But what it can do is it can keep us from asking the most important question that you can ask somebody. This is actually the best question you can ask anybody, and it's this, is what's important to you? We can wave, we can talk about the weather, but unless we know what's important to somebody and ask that, then we don't really get to know the person. There was a day that some religious rulers asked Jesus that question, and they basically asked him, what's the most important commandment? Or in other words, what's most important to God? And this was his response. He answered in Mark chapter 12, verse 30 through 31. It's recorded, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind. The second is love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." So Jesus responded that second only to one's love relationship with God, is love for neighbor. That's heavy. That's really heavy. And so what if Jesus was what if he was like shooting really straight with us? Right? I think sometimes we like to read Jesus and we file it into a file. Well, we put that here and he said it here and we're getting information. But what if he really meant for us to hear him and then do this and really make that? Like, if you've ever if you live in a gated community or you have a friend that does, they've got the gate code, right? You want to go to the home and get in, but you got to have the gate code, right? And you have to remember the gate code, or they have to give you the gate code. What if Jesus is giving us the gate code for a life that really changes things, for a life that really makes an impact in the world? What if he's making it this simple, like it's 3492? That's it, 3492. When we were first getting to know the Browns, we were just a couple months in, and we were at a practice, and they needed to pick something up, and so I told Michelle, hey, go here, and they're like, hey, here's the code to get in here to the garage or whatever, and I'm sitting here, I'm just like, they're crazy, they're giving it, so Michelle's going over there, and people don't know she's coming in, I'm here, I'm approved, but if somebody has your gate code or your garage code, that's serious stuff. Jesus is giving us just that. He's giving us the gate code for a life that makes a difference. And here's the thing, we don't have to wonder what needs to change in the world or what needs to get better in the world. It's almost like we have to cut through all of the stuff. Like there's so much that we know is wrong. There's so much that we know needs help. There's so much that knows to be changed, and it can be overwhelming. But what if we just narrowed it down and said, well, maybe Jesus is telling us, like, hey, the real way to really hit what the world needs now, right, which is still love, is to love my neighbor. Just the person right in front of me. Takes zero creativity. Who should I love today? Well, here we are. There's my neighbors. What if that is what we're supposed to do? We don't have to, it's hard to sort through it. Now, here's the cool thing. Each of us is uniquely positioned to do this. We absolutely are uniquely positioned to do this. And so here's what I want us to know today. A good neighbor changes the world. Absolutely does. A good neighbor changes the world. And every single person can do it. So we're positioned to do this if we take the great commandment literally. In other words, here's what I'm about. Like that's what we've changed kind of our purpose, our vision for the church, or what are we about? Somebody say, well, what's the Vineyard about? We're about loving God, we're about loving people. Okay? Now I realize there's a lot of mess in between, but real simple. That's what we're about, is we're about those things. And then the question goes, okay, well, what are the things that I need to do to do that? And so Jesus got in a discussion at another time, and this guy asked Jesus a question. He asked him, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus says to him, well, how do you read the law? How do you read the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament? How do you read that? How do you interpret it? And so the man quotes the same Old Testament verse as Jesus, right? He's in good. If you answer the question the same as Jesus, you're in good. And so he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And then Jesus goes after him, though, and he says, great, do this and you'll live, right? It's kind of like, hey, sure, simple enough. But then it says that the man wanted to justify himself in Luke 10, verse 29. He wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Okay. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. So then he says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So the way this has been applied for 2,000 years is like, look, everybody's my neighbor because you've got a Samaritan who was, despised by the Jews, and there was all kinds of strife between the Jews and the Samaritans. So if a Samaritan is the hero of the story and he's the one healing up, well, then everybody's my neighbor. There's no barriers. And that's the concept, is that the true interpretation should be not that everybody's my neighbor, just like, wow, so many choices, what do I do? Like the old story of the starfish that are up on the shore, and how do I save them all? And it's like, I can't, so they throw the one back. I save that one, right? It's not to get overwhelmed by the many and just say, well, I'm supposed to care for everybody. And that's what we a lot of times do with this kind of passage. But the true concept is that we are to cross normal barriers or social barriers beyond discomfort to love those. In other words, don't let the barriers that are set up keep you from loving somebody and be a neighbor to that person. And that's the true interpretation there. But here's what we need to do with it. A good neighbor changes the world by loving their neighbor, like their actual neighbor. That's it. It's, right? And this is hard. This is hard. Just like a relationship with God, right? It's kind of saying, oh, great. Yeah, love God. Sure, did it. Did it today. What else do you want me to do? Right? Well, go love your neighbor now. See, loving the neighbor many times is actually kind of it's a zooming in on our true relationship with God. So I can go through all the motions, I can do all the things relationship with God, but then if you look at my horizontal relationship with my neighbor, and I don't like my neighbor, I hate my neighbor, I throw things at my neighbor, whatever, and then that's my true relationship with God. It's not just a picture of my relationship with my neighbor, it's of my true heart with God. Because God is one that has always been about neighboring. Think about it, and about community. So God, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, when it speaks of God, it speaks of a community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so what we see is that we see perfect community, one God, 3 persons, but they defer to each other, they love each other, they help each other. It's one perfect community. And then you see him create man and woman. And you see that he would be with them in the cool of the day in the garden, right? Like a neighbor. And you look at it and you read the Bible, and what do you see? You see the people running from God as fast as they can. And guess what? You and I too, right? For all of sin and falls short of the glory of God. So in other words, I'm moving away from God's ideal and what he set up, and I'm moving away from it. And then Romans also says that because of that, I've earned separation from God. And so we're running away, and then you see God, hey, come back. That's what you see. And he's shown as like a mother hen caring for her chickens. Jesus says that he's shown as a father. He's shown as all these different pictures of God. But at the end of the day, you have this person that is so into relationship with other people that he just never stops chasing us down, like we sang today. He's the best neighbor ever. And so that's what we see, is that our neighbor, that's where it really has to hit the ground. So there's a book, The Art of Neighboring, and it's been around since like 2012, so it's about 7 years old. But in 2005, one of the authors was in our area of Vineyard in Colorado, and so I actually first heard this concept, the way he breaks it down, not neighboring, obviously, is in the Bible, but kind of breaking it down, like making this real practical, loving your neighbor. In 2005, we were in a meeting, and he broke it down, and he did this exercise that I'm going to have you do right now. And so, I don't know, so 14 years ago, I did what you're about to do. And so, and I have copies of this. I have 10, and I'll tell you how to get one. And so, so that's the book. And so here's a couple of quotes from the book. It's excellent. It's one of those books that you read, and it's not like this revolutionary, like, I never thought of that. But it's kind of like, well, yeah, but there's an application. It hits street level. That's it's so good. It's so practical. If we say everyone is my neighbor, it can become an excuse for avoiding the implications of following the great commandment. Our neighbors become defined in the broadest terms. Now, the problem is, however, that when we aim for everything, we hit nothing. So when we insist we're neighbors with everybody, often we end up being neighbors with nobody. So here's the application. Here's the lab. So in your bulletin, okay, go ahead and pull out, there's a map in there, a block map. And so, and if you don't, anybody not have one or need a pen, you're going to need a pen. So grab a pen. If you don't have one, it looks like Kathy's grabbing pens. And so what you're going to do, here's how you're going to do this, okay? Is I want you to reflect on the 8 houses closest to you. Now, I understand that some of us live more rural, and so it's harder to grab those 8 houses, but I know you can do it. I know you can do it because I grew up till I was about 12, 16 acres, and I still remember who our 8 closest neighbors were. So I know you can do it. If you're like way out there and it's super hard to do, then I don't know who are the people you go to the store and shop with those people, but there's an application. So here's what I want you to write down in each square. Start with this. The names of each of your neighbors. Okay, so you don't have to do the whole family, but just at least if there's kids, the parents. So the name of each of your neighbors. Jim and Darlene, you guys get a pass because you're in transition. You're like, hey, I don't know. So write down the names of the 8 closest homes near you. You can write down first name, last name. And some of you, who was here, I taught through this in November. Who was here for that? Okay, did you improve? How much? By 3. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. That's like 33%. That's incredible. Like if you were to raise your income 33% a year, would that be incredible? But you just raised your neighbor understanding. That's good. Okay, so take a few minutes to write that down. Now we're not going to go through here, but it's on your outline on the message page there. This is what I want you to do later. Write down anything that you know about them, that you found through conversation. You had a conversation with them, and they shared something with you important about them or something else, okay? And then the other thing is anything of depth that you know about them, their dreams, needs, desires, fears, spiritual journey, that kind of stuff, okay? So the authors, as they went through this, they found that the names of each of their neighbors, that one, it was only about 3 out of 10 people could do that. Could like write down the 8 names. And then it went down for each one, just a huge percentage. So the percentage of people that actually can do this, you may look at this and say, this is no big deal. But this right here is huge. And it's interesting. I think it's something that God's doing. In all realms, in cities, you see a big focus on neighboring. Because people have realized, I'm around people all the time, but I lack meaningful relationships. So work's not doing it necessarily. Out in the community is not doing it necessarily. So people are looking for meaningful relationships. And you can find those with your neighbors. So did anybody get all 8? Come on, brag a little. Okay, good. Way to go. Okay, did anybody get like 6? 6 of them? Okay, nice. Okay, 4? No, people are going to stop raising hands, right? I think I'm supposed to go the other way, right? I'm supposed to start low and then go high. Anyways, got it wrong. So, but isn't it? It's kind of in your face, right? Because the problem is that you move in, and we've done this. Like neighboring is super important to us. We've done this, and there are some neighbors. I'm like, hey man, right? And we talk and do everything, but I've forgotten their name. And so Michelle and I try to gear up and try to remember who they are. We have amazing neighbors. We have, a few weeks ago when we did the youth all-nighter, we had a bunch of youth here overnight, and so a big snow came in. And when we got home, our driveway and our walkway was totally cleared. And so I said, wow, this is unbelievable. And so I said, I know it was him because he's got a snowblower, and I know he did it. So I texted him all, man, you are amazing. Thanks so much. And he says, hey, we've got amazing neighbors. It wasn't me. And so how awesome is that to think through your head who helped us out? Who served us in that way? And it was huge because we were tired. And so when you have neighbors like that, you really realize how important it is. So why is it important for us to know this about, that we really change the world through our neighbors? Well, a good neighbor changes the world because it's the way of Jesus, right? And so a good neighbor, whether they follow Jesus or not, they're actually doing this stuff that Jesus did. It's actually a principle that when God became one of us, this is what he did. So in John chapter 1, verse 14, it says this, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory. So glory is like the weight of something or the substance of something. So when you hear that about God, it's saying like, we've seen what God is like. We've seen what he's like. And it's important. The New Testament makes that very clear that we don't have to wonder what God is like. We can have wonder, but we don't have to guess. See, what God has done is he's made it very clear who he is by his Son coming and being amongst us. All throughout, you see John and other books where it's just like, look, if you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. It's very clear for us. And so it says, we've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. The Message version of this says, the Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighborhood. Isn't that good? Think about it. When God wanted to communicate with us to make sure that we would know who he was and then make things right between us and him, he moved into the neighborhood. So they say incarnational, so incarnate, so in flesh. So God was in flesh, like he moved into the tent of flesh, just like us. He became one of us. That's how he decided to communicate. And he was a neighbor. Like Jesus lived next to people and did that. And as you read him, isn't he just the best neighbor ever? Right? The neighbors that are rude and obnoxious and picking on other people, Jesus stands up to them and says, hey, you guys, this is how we neighbor. Right? The neighbors that are going through a hard time and they're the ones with the house falling apart and the front yard is all beat up and they're downtrodden and everybody says, oh, stay away from that house. Jesus is over there having tea. Right? I know that I'm mixing ages and times and different things, but you guys following me? Jesus is there. And then all of a sudden, in essence, that person that their yard and everything was falling apart, you look at their home and now they're with Jesus. It's like now there's poppies planted and tulips and flowers coming up and it's the fresh paint. And it's like everything's changed because of that relationship with Jesus. So Jesus is absolutely the best neighbor ever, and that's what he does. His first followers, he was close enough, right? That's what incarnational is. Close enough. I'm a part of real life with you. 1 John chapter 1, verse 1 through 3, one of his first followers, one of his first neighbors, said this: "That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at, and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life." So he's talking about Jesus. "The life appeared, we have seen it and testified to it, and we proclaim to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and has appeared to us. We proclaim to you what we have seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ." So Jesus is the humble king. He's not far off, but he's right here with us. He's moved in with us. You know, we would think that if God moved into the earth, right, he'd have a big compound, right? Because that's what do the most powerful, most important people do, right? And if you don't have the gate code, you know, man, how do you get through? Do you jump the fence? What do you do? But no, God moved into like an everyday, just normal neighborhood. You know, he was the son of a carpenter, and so Jesus was probably a carpenter. And so he worked with his hands. He was a tradesperson. People probably would come over, "Hey, can you help me with this? You know, this broke," or "Can you help me build this thing?" And so just very normal person. And so think about communication-wise. Like we have their communication class next Sunday. And, you know, so important, so helpful. You're going to get things that are going to help every relationship. But think about it. God, this is the major shot. I'm going to communicate most clearly with people. And what he did is he communicated that way. There wasn't any big billboards or marketing what you see today. But 2,000 years later, millions and millions and millions and millions of people have received that right relationship with God because he just got amongst people and loved this one and loved that one. And then that one loved them and that one loved them. Isn't that amazing? God trusted that process. He trusted that time. And the New Testament calls it the fullness of time. That when just the right time came about, and if you read history, you can see that, you know, all the different road systems were built up to a certain place like no other in any time in history, and the trade routes and all sorts of things were set. But God chose that time, the fullness of time, his important time to come in. But again, he didn't set up high. He just became one of us, just an everyday person. Now, the next thing is that good neighbors change the world by intentionally investing time in their neighborhood. And that's the big thing. And that's where we get pushed on, right, is time. Because time is at a premium. We have more tools to manage our time than ever, but we don't have any time. And that's actually not true. It's just that we don't put the time in different places. We manage it. We have to prioritize. And so we first have to recognize the barriers. So the first barrier we talked about earlier, we don't see value in neighboring. Give it value. Give it value, right? When Steve started skydiving, right, he did something that I never will do. Except for when Cooper turns 18. I've kind of locked in a contract there. When Cooper was 2, we're driving down the road in Colorado. He's looking up. He goes, "Dad, when can I skydive?" Like, oh, man. And I told him, I said, "Well, you can skydive when you're 18. Will you come with me?" Yes. Okay? But see, I look at skydiving. That's just for me. I look at it, and I don't see the value that I want to invest in that. I'll invest in it relationally because of something else. For Steve, he has so much value in it, so much so that other people do it because they see Steve and how he enjoys it. And he hops into it. So I'm not saying neighboring is like skydiving, but something becomes important when you invest in it. Think about a TV show or a movie that you love to watch over and over again. You started to watch, and then all of a sudden, this has value. I'm going to invest time in this. Or look at any activity that you do, like brushing your teeth. You've found that has value, hopefully, right? showering, eating, exercising. Anything that you've done that has impacted your life, you've had value. So neighboring, give it value and then invest time in it. So a lack of time, right? That's the next barrier. So invest small amounts of time. Don't show up today and get a loudspeaker, hey people, let's neighbor, right? That's not the way to go. Just invest small amounts of time. You will change 2019 in your neighborhood. You will change the atmosphere in your neighborhood if you very simply just are able to fill out those other two things, which is I've asked people what's important to them, I've shared what's important to me, and I know some other things about them. And so I've moved beyond, hey, you're driving by, how's the weather, and isn't it great? If you just move beyond that, you will change the atmosphere of your neighborhood. Absolutely. But it's done just by investing a little bit of time. Just here and there. Everything that grows. Like, have you heard about compounding interest? Right? That if you invest $100 when you're 18, and then you just do that, 100, you can increase it as you make more. But even if you just invested $100 and just put it like in the S&P 500 index fund, and did it till you're 65 or whatever, you'd have, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Just, taking a really conservative return. Just by putting $100 a month, right? And we love that. And here's the thing, though. I heard that in high school. I didn't do it, right? I didn't really apply those things until my 30s. It took me a while. I'm okay, I think that's a good idea. But so it is with anything. Compounding builds over time. So it is with your neighborhood. You don't have to drastically change your life, but just take one step. And here's what's going to happen, is that look for it. When you see somebody, hey, how's it going? Because we found the guy that did our walk with the snowblower, and so we found out who it was, and he had just gotten the new snowblower, right? He's like, man, I got to keep using this thing. So he did his. He's like, I got to keep going. So Michelle made him some banana bread and brought it over, and he and I chatted some and that sort of thing. And, we saw the time. And it's good because this guy, I was stealing his newspaper for a couple weeks. That's a different story. But we've been rebuilding relationship, okay? And so we've talked about it. We've worked it out. And so, but invest small amounts of time. Also, the next thing is a lack of trust. Here's the thing. The third is not a barrier if you do the first two. It's just not. If you give it value, you invest small amounts of time, the trust will come in those areas. Okay, so we also move beyond barriers by remembering God's plan. And this is the thing, out of everything that we talk about, I really want you to grab onto this today because it puts you right into the very life of God, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to not have a religion. We're not trying to have just a belief system, but we're trying to join God's life and what he's doing in time and space and in history and be a part of that, invite other people into it. But we have to recognize what's the big picture, what's he doing? Is God intentional about this? Well, Acts chapter 17, verse 26 or 27, it comes from the book of Acts. We'll study this in several months. But Paul is speaking to a bunch of really smart people. And so he's breaking down for them that the God that he worships is very intentional, and he's actually the one that's decided these things here. So look what it says. He says, from one man, he made every nation of men. So the God that Paul worships. That they should inhabit the whole earth. Okay? Pretty standard, but this is a belief system. This is your paradigm, right? This is where do we come from? How did we get here? Okay? And then he says, and then he determined the time set for them. Now we're getting pretty personal. You could have just been a deist up to this point. So in other words, yeah, there's a God, but he's impersonal. Some people think that God is kind of like a clock maker. He makes the clock, he turns it up, and then he just kind of, all right, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. Let's just let it run its course. But now Paul shows that the God that he worships is very personal. He determined the time set for them. So you sitting here today, God intentionally decided that you would live during this time. I mean, how amazing is that? That God was that intentional with you that he would say that Ben would live during this time. Kevin would live during this time, that Mike would live during this time, that Heather would live during this time. In the midst of everybody else. And then, listen to this, in the exact places where they should live, hence neighborhood. The exact places that they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. So quite simply, God has placed us in our specific neighborhoods for a reason. Absolutely. So intentional. And I know some people take this and they're like, man, this is big, I better get it right. Here's the thing. God is more interested, right? You know, if you decide, hey, I want to live in Piper, or I want to live in Wyandotte County or in Johnson County, or I want to live in Parkville, or I want to live in Zona Rosa, you know, I want to live in Leavenworth County or Lansing, you know, which one does God want me to live in? Well, here's the thing. God is more interested how you live in Wyandotte County or Johnson or Leavenworth or Lansing or Parkville than which one you're living in. Okay? He's more concerned, are you getting the gate code of how you really change the world? Love your neighbor. Because he's not going to call you to Wyandotte County or Johnson County or whatever and just say, hey, that's great, you're there, but then you don't do his business, what he's all about. See, there's the people try to figure out, like, what's the will of God? You may be making a serious decision right now or recently, and you may be second guessing or whatever. My interpretation and what I see is that the will of God is this: love God, love people. Okay? And I believe that that's the general specific will of God. But then when we come down to decision making, I believe that we have tons of leeway. While I'm listening to God, right? Because I'm not just looking up like a map, like, gosh, if I take this road, I get here. That's not the way to do it. But I have a relationship with Jesus, and Jesus is speaking to me, and I'm working with him. But when it comes down to, I think that we have tons of room. That's why you're in a good place where you have that relationship with God, and then you're trying to make a decision, you're like, and God's like, hey, I'm going to bless you if you do this. I'm going to bless you if you do this. What are you going to do? I mean, think about the respect and just the honoring that God has for us, and that he does that. My first time with that was, I was 23, and I graduated college, and I had a job offer with a really good company. I was an intern high school pastor on staff part-time, and so this point came where it was like, if I took this job, it was going to take up a lot of this time. I couldn't do as much. And I remember sitting there in this chair in my apartment by myself. I'm like, God, what do you want me to do? And he's like, look, I'm going to bless you either way. What are you going to do? What do you want? I said, well, I want to serve you. I want to pour into youth. I want to do this. And so there's that route. And so God puts us in places, but then he lets us make decisions there. So your neighborhood, your people, God's very intentional about that. So what do we do with this? Well, one, pray. God, give me a desire to be in relationship with my literal neighbors. Okay? Because that may be hard today. Especially, first of all, I wouldn't do it today. Okay? Everybody's cranky today, right? You know, lost an hour, you know, and we'll do the luau on a different weekend next week. You know, it's like, great. By the way, we do have a margarita machine. And one person said, really? All right. I said, no, virgin margaritas. So they're Mary margaritas, okay? And so, come on, people. That was good. That was good. One of my sons came up with that one last night. You know, he's like, Dad, you're doing that at church? I'm like, no, they're virgin margaritas. And he goes, Mary margaritas? I'm like, there you go. Okay. And so he knows his Bible. And so, but pray for a desire to be in relationship with your neighbors, right? Okay. And then 2, pray for your neighborhood or neighbors. Pray God's favor, God's blessing, God's protection upon the neighborhood. So the most natural way to connect with people is through shared activities. Baking, cooking, okay? Playing sports, watching sports or other shows on TV. Share a meal together. Just, hey, let's share a meal, okay? Throw a block party. There's resources on your bulletin. There's actually this website. There's resources how to throw a block party, how to do these different things. And then also, you know, you can ask for help or offer help. And so, in closing, here's some further quotes from Art of Neighboring. Neighboring really matters because it is relational. It's the very best way to impact the people in need in our communities. So a good neighbor always trumps a good program. As the band comes up, I'll just close with this story. Like I said, I grew up out in the country, and I've experienced, this is so important to me because I believe, I don't remember exactly all the words that were shared, but I believe that the first time that somebody shared Jesus with me was when I threw a rock at their car. No joke. So we lived out in the country, and there was these creeks, and so one thing, actually don't think poorly of me, it wasn't a real rock, it was like a dirt clod, okay? And so just, a little less impact, it's not a full metal jacket. But so this car was going by, and my friend and I, we were just like, yeah, so we're going to throw these dirt clods at these cars. And so most of the time we missed. But this time, I just railed back, just full, and whap, and just, we got one. And so, and we're, oh no, we didn't know what to do. And so we go off running to this group of trees. And my friend was faster than me and took off around the side. And so I'm still remember just sitting there. I didn't hide very well, but I thought the guy wouldn't find me. And he comes up, and I remember this gentleman. He was a neighbor. I knew who he was. And he came by, and he just looked me in the eye, and he said, hey, did you do that? And, yes, sir. Okay. And he said, and he shared with me, and I remember the feeling going from just utter, terror to, mercy. No joke. I don't remember the exact words, but it was mercy. And he spoke to me about stuff, because later on, I remember his kids invited us to church or whatever, and so I knew that he knew Jesus. But this guy just stood before me, and I threw a dirt clod at his car. And the guy just had mercy on me. And then, no joke, he says something. He goes, and you're the Busick kid, right? You live right here? Because our driveway, big long dirt driveway, was up there. And I said, yeah. And then he said, okay. So I'm sitting, and my friend comes up, and he goes, what happened? And he goes, he let me off the hook. I don't know what that was, but it changed. And the guy drives up my driveway. And I'm kind of like, hey, that guy let me off, but my dad's not. And so I go home 8 hours later, and let my dad cool off. And I see him. He's like, "Where you been?" I'm like, "Oh, just around." And I said, "Hey, I saw Mr. So and so came by," and he's like, "Yeah." I said, "So what'd you talk about?" And the guy didn't bring it up. Right? And I think that's what a good neighbor is like, right? They're an advocate for you. They show mercy upon you. But see, that guy was the first person that ever showed me Jesus. Just full of grace and mercy for me. Just my messed up self. And I don't throw dirt clods anymore, but I do some other things here and there. And God's mercy and grace is just so key. I mean, think about that. My parents didn't bring me to church, but God was able to share himself with me through a neighbor in one of my worst moments. That's who we are as we go, guys. We just showing love. We don't have to be brilliant, but we can just love and accept people. So let's stand together and let's worship.